I saw the number pop up in my bank account, and my heart just stopped. $5,000. The description read, Q4 performance bonus. For a split second, I actually forgot how to breathe. 5 grand wasn't just a bonus. It was a lifeline. It was the new transmission my car was dying for. It was finally fixing the leaky roof I'd been patching up for months. It was a plane ticket to see my parents, who I hadn't hugged in over a year. I practically floated out of my chair, a massive grin plastered across my face, and made a beeline for my boss's office to thank him. I was already picturing the big smile, the firm handshake, the whole "you earned it" speech. But when I burst through his door, babbling my thank yous, the look on his face wasn't joy. It wasn't pride, it was pure, unfiltered panic, and that's when my whole world tilted. That's when I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. To really get how deep this betrayal cut, you have to understand who Brenda was, or at least who we all thought she was. Brenda was our accountant, sure, but she was basically the office mom. She'd been with our company, a marketing firm with about 80 people. For over a decade, she knew your name, your spouse's name, your kids' names, probably your dog's name too. Brenda was the one who always organized the birthday cakes and the holiday potlucks. Her desk was this little island of calm in our chaotic office, always perfectly neat, with a small candy dish that was somehow, magically, never empty. She was, for lack of a better word, a saint. Got a payroll question, she'd sit with you and patiently explain every single line item. Drowning in a complicated expense report, she'd be right there with you, making sure every receipt was perfect. She often worked late, the last one in the building, and would just brush it off with a smile, saying she wanted everything perfectly balanced for the morning. We trusted her completely. In a company our size, that kind of trust is the glue holding everything together. We didn't have some big, scary finance department. We had Brenda, and Brenda felt like family. My boss, David, was a great guy, super creative and driven, but he'd be the first to tell you he was not a numbers person. That's exactly why he hired Brenda and gave her so much freedom. She handled everything: payroll, paying bills, sending invoices, approving expenses. He trusted her with the financial health of the company he'd built from nothing. And that trust, that was her greatest weapon, because while she was baking brownies for a meeting and asking about your weekend, she was systematically bleeding the company dry. The panic on David's face quickly morphed into total confusion. Here I was, thanking him for a $5,000 bonus, and he was just staring at me like I'd lost my mind. "What bonus?" he asked, his voice tight. "We haven't issued Q4 bonuses. I'm still finalizing the numbers." I felt my face get hot with embarrassment. "Oh, well, I got a deposit this morning for $5,000. It said Q4 performance bonus." I just figured. He held up a hand, cutting me off as he spun his monitor around. "Show me." I pointed at the line on my online banking statement. He stared at it, then back at me, and all the color just drained from his face. He got up, quietly closed his office door, and dropped his voice to a whisper. "The bonus pool was just approved yesterday," he said, and I could hear a little tremor in his voice. "Your performance bonus, it was supposed to be $60,000, not 5. $60,000. The number just hung there in the air, so huge it felt fake. For half a second I felt this insane rush of joy, but it was immediately smothered by the cold dread rolling off of David. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "Someone intercepted it," he whispered. "Someone changed the number." My brain just couldn't make that leap. A bank error, some kind of computer glitch. It had to be. "Who runs payroll?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Brenda," he said, his expression hardening into stone. "Only Brenda." That night, long after everyone else went home, David and I sat in his office, the screen glow casting long shadows on the walls. He pulled up the master payroll files. He was a marketing guy, so the spreadsheets were mostly a foreign language to him. But I've always had a knack for spotting patterns. We started with my name, and there it was, a line item for a $60,000 bonus. Approved by David, then another entry, logged just hours later from Brenda's account, voiding the first payment and issuing a new one for $5,000. Right below it was a second transaction, a payment for $55,000 to a vendor I'd never heard of. BA Financial Services. My blood ran cold. "Who is BA Financial Services?" I asked. David frantically typed the name into our system. Nothing, it didn't exist. A quick web search showed the address was just a P.O. box one state over. My stomach was in knots. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate, this was theft. "If she did it to me," I said. My voice barely audible. Who else did she do it to? For the next 4 hours, we just dug. It was like pulling on one loose thread and watching the entire thing unravel. We checked every single employee file, and we found it again and again. A senior designer who was supposed to get $40,000 got just $4,000. The other $36,000 paid out to another ghost company. A junior programmer's $15,000 bonus was sliced down to $1,500. It just kept going. She was skimming, taking giant handfuls of our money and funneling it into a web of fake companies. The little payments she let through were just enough to keep us happy and stop us from looking too closely. It was diabolical. She wasn't just stealing from the company. She was stealing straight from our pockets. We started to realize she'd been doing this for years, not just with bonuses, but with expense reports, faking invoices from real suppliers, and paying them to accounts she controlled. The scale of it was staggering. We were looking at hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars. My accidental discovery was the tripwire that brought her entire crooked world crashing down. The next morning, the office felt unreal. Brenda was there, cheerful as always, humming while she watered her desk plant. She actually smiled and waved at me. "Morning, big plans for the weekend." She chirped. I felt a wave of nausea. How could she be so normal? How could she look me in the eye? David had already called our company's lawyer and a forensic accountant. They told us what to do: gather the proof, make sure it's undeniable, and then confront her. At 10 a.m., David sent a simple email: "Brenda, could you join me and Sarah in the main conference room? Just need to go over some payroll discrepancies." She walked in carrying a stack of files. "All business? What seems to be the problem?" she asked, setting her papers on the table. David sat at the head of the table, his face a grim mask. "Brenda," he started, his voice perfectly steady. "We were reviewing the Q4 bonus payouts. It looks like there was a pretty big error with Sarah's payment." Brenda put on a great show of being surprised. "Oh, let me take a look. It's possible I fat-fingered an entry. You know how it is." She reached for her files. "I don't think this was a mistake," I said, my own voice shaking a little. I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was the printout showing my original $60,000 bonus, right next to the voided transaction, and the new $5,000 payment. "And I don't think this was a mistake either." I slid another paper over. The $55,000 payment to the fake BA Financial Services. Brenda stared at the papers, for the first time ever. The cheerful mask slipped. Her face went white. Her smile evaporated. She looked from the paper to me and then to David. The silence was so thick you could feel it. I don't understand," she stammered, but her eyes were already darting toward the door. "It must be a system glitch. The software has been acting up lately. The software didn't create a shell company with a PO box registered in your sister's name." "Did it, Brenda?" David said. His voice was ice. The forensic accountant had worked fast, and that was it. That was the kill shot. All the fight just drained out of her. Her shoulders slumped. She didn't cry or scream. She just sat there, completely hollowed out. All the years of fake smiles and phony kindness vanished, leaving behind nothing but a cold, calculating stranger. The person we knew as Brenda had been a complete lie, a character she played so she could rob us all blind. So what happens when you find out the heart of your office is rotten? Pure chaos? Brenda was fired on the spot and escorted from the building. She didn't say a single word. She didn't even look at anyone as she walked past their desks one last time. An hour later, David called an emergency all-hands meeting. The air in the conference room was thick with anxiety. When David stood up and explained, in a strained voice, that Brenda had been terminated for stealing company money, including from our bonuses, the room just exploded. First came disbelief, then shock, and then a tidal wave of pure anger. People were yelling, some were crying. Everyone felt betrayed, not just over the money, but personally. It felt like finding out a family member you loved had been slowly poisoning you the whole time. The fallout was messy. Morale hit rock bottom. The trust that used to be our company's greatest strength turned into paranoia. People were triple-checking their pay stubs, questioning everything. The theft didn't just drain our bank accounts. It stole our sense of community and security. The place that had felt like a second home suddenly felt hostile. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers and auditors. The forensic accountants figured out the full scale of the damage. Over 7 years, Brenda had stolen just over $1.8 million. She'd used it to pay for a life we knew nothing about, luxury vacations, designer clothes, even a second home. She did it all with a tangled web of fake invoices, skimming our bonuses, and even creating ghost employees on the payroll. She was charged with massive theft and fraud. Brenda eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to prison. The court ordered her to pay the money back, but we knew we'd probably never see most of it. The company took a huge hit, and it set David's own retirement plans back by years. To make sure this could never happen again, we had to change everything. David hired an outside accounting firm. New, much stricter rules were put in place. No single person would ever have that much unchecked power again. It was a hard, expensive lesson. The emotional scars took a lot longer to heal. That family feeling was gone, replaced by something more guarded and professional. But in a weird way, the whole nightmare brought the rest of us closer. We had survived it together. We had found the rot and cut it out. I never got the full $60,000, but I did get a promotion. David put me in charge of a new internal oversight committee. My accidental discovery had turned me into the person who pulled back the curtain and brought the whole house of cards down. It's a terrifying thing to realize someone you trust isn't who you think they are. The betrayal is almost always worse than the money. This happened at my job, but these stories are everywhere. So I have to ask, have you ever worked with someone who was living a secret double life? Have you ever been a victim of this kind of theft? Share your story in the comments. Talking about this is so important, because knowing what to look for is the first step in stopping it.